Hi, I'm Stephanie Arell, and today what I want to talk about with you is how our bodies store trauma. We're going to cover the way in which this works physiologically, neurologically, some examples of what that looks like, and then also just briefly touch on ways that you can release it. The topic comes about because I am starting to build a company called Banna Growth, and in the structure or the ethos of the company, what we're very interested in is really looking at the intersections between what happens after trauma at a cognitive level, so the way that you think, at your physiological level, so what your body experiences, but also at a spiritual level, with spirituality being pretty loosely defined, related to how you make meaning in the world, where you find purpose, and kind of like the greatest thing that you hold to be your truth, as being kind of the way you anchor yourself spiritually. I think what's really important to start with, and what I underlie with all of my students, is that trauma is not something that after you experience it stays located in your mind, nor is it something you can talk yourself out of or simply talk yourself through. Now, telling a trauma story, talking to people about your experiences, going through the chronology and trying to make sense of it, that's all part of what trauma recovery is. But if there's not attention paid to the way that your body physiologically responds to the trauma, then at some point you're going to hit a wall in terms of processing the event or events, and then kind of moving through them to integrate the reality and this new being or sense of self into your present time. To do that, attention to the body has to be paid. And we'll talk about what that means in a second, but why that's so important is because when you have something happen to you that's really, really scary, that leaves you with a sense of helplessness, where there's terror, and where there's this idea that you can't do anything about fixing that terror, when those things collide, your neurological system responds. And when your neurological system is responding to this, you basically are shutting off your higher cognitive processes. So you're not learning anything new, you're not thinking, you're just acting, responding, protecting yourself, freezing, whatever your body's doing. And that experience literally lodges itself at a cellular level in your body. And it's that kind of phenomenon that later in your life, or after the trauma, and time is irrelevant how far the distance is from the trauma, where something might happen and you physiologically respond the same way as the original or originary event or events. So your body really can make no distinction between the original event of the trauma and a stimuli that might be similar but not the same to that event later. The physiological response is very often encapsulated by the concept of fight, flight, freeze mechanism. There's a new category that's been added to that called fawn, which to me is a little bit more behavioral than the fight, flight, or freeze. And what I mean by that is fawn is sort of like a people pleasing or a pulling back and letting somebody else's way of being in the world rule the way that you behave. And the fight, flight, or freeze, more purely to me, is really about how you respond physiologically to particular events. During a traumatic circumstance, you may feel the urge to fight back, to be aggressive. That would be the fight response. Another option, and I think probably, depending on what the event is itself, this one is actually a little more of a default, is the idea of freezing. So I'm not going in order, but freezes where there is a paralysis, where there no words would come out of your mouth, where your body feels immovable. And that's actually a really highly protective mechanism that every animal species will use, like playing dead, in order to protect themselves. So our bodies just naturally go into this state of like, I can't do anything, I can't move, I can't say anything, in order to protect ourselves. Flee is the second in the order, but the third that I'm talking about, and that is simply this desire to run away, to get away, to go and hide. So that mechanism is another way in which you physiologically respond. And if you've done any kind of hiding from stimulus or relationships, really it's your body reacts before you can even think about, why am I in a ball on the floor in the closet, because I want to get away from the yelling if this is the situation. Now, what happens over time is that these physiological responses get stored in us sometimes. So you may see somebody who really has the urge to like squeeze their fist, reach out, wants to box something, does have a desire to hit somebody. Maybe they don't act on that behavior, but their body from an initial event in which they fought or which they felt like fighting will continue to manifest this urge to get that feeling, that fight out of their body. And so it'll manifest physically. And some of you may be identifying with that kind of behavior. Another example would be a child who, in a fear response when they were younger, held their breath, or didn't want to talk, or tried not to breathe when they thought threat was coming. And then as an adult, they're incapable of making a breath go into their stomach and instead stay very tight in their upper body and only breathe right through here in order to control breath. Sometimes I've heard of people who, in events that were traumatic in interpersonal relationships with parents, would regulate their breath to the parent, say as if they were sleeping next to them, not to bother the parent, and then will find themselves doing this kind of rhythmic breathing to calm themselves as an adult. It's the same exact kind of idea. This idea of shallow breathing or rhythmic breathing or counting when you're stressed, generally, those are indications of a sign that you're holding stress from some kind of traumatic event in your body. There are other signs. So probably one of the most, especially for women, one of the most frequent is to have digestive issues. And the digestive issues will manifest around stress. I even think oftentimes there's sensitivity to certain foods, not allergies, but like the intolerance of particular dietary intake because the stomach is either too acidy from stress or doesn't produce enough acid to break down certain food. So it might not be the food itself, but the way the digestive system is just not capable of holding stress. IBS or irritable bowel syndrome is often a diagnosis in relationship to holding chronic stress in one's stomach. Another place where people will have physiological manifestations of trauma history are in the hip flexor muscles. That muscle is particularly active during fight, flight, and freeze, and it can stay sort of permanently tired as a result of being in a constant state of hyperarousal or being overstimulated. Another location where that gets stored is in the chest, in the throat, and in the neck. I actually just worked with somebody who has difficulty articulating words because of tightness that is impacting the vocal cords, which I presume is coming from a traumatic history. Any kind of hypervigilance or an event, not an event, but if you find yourself being easily startled, especially say someone coming up behind you, that can often be an indication of having a traumatic event and being highly sensitive to stimuli coming from behind. Everybody listening to this has had some experience with disrupted sleep as a result of stress. So you imagine that you have a trauma history or that you have had your sleep disrupted by a traumatic event. The chances of your sleep being erratic or not reliable or difficult, or you're being diagnosed or experiencing insomnia, generally you can kind of go, oh gosh, this is related to some stressful event. And if there's a trauma history, sleep just is going to get disrupted. And this has to do with, perhaps nightmares, the idea that your heart your heart rate literally is not reliable based on your body still going through and processing stimuli from trauma. So it's so difficult, these somatic experiences as a result of trauma, because it's like your body is trying to do its best to help you regulate, but there's just so much stress that gets stored, and then it just starts to manifest in these physical symptoms. I think the other and probably less recognized phenomena is the idea of being, or the experience of feeling disconnected from your body. So actually not having a feeling. And I have a client like this who literally just has no internal connection with what's happening and can't feel things. So working with her, part of the goal would be to have her inhabit her body and actually feel things. I think that people that have this experience, I have seen incidences of self-harm and people that are disassociated from their body, because the self-harm act will actually stimulate some feeling. And so that's why the self-harm is engaged with this population in order to feel something, you know? Now, in terms of thinking of how to address each of these issues, let's start with the one that I just finished, which is this idea of dissociation. Being present in your body and little by little trying to feel it, little by little, baby steps. Think of a puddle. You just touch it, that's enough. Just a little at a time, and let yourself slowly be in your body. Examples: anything sensual, and sensual being of the senses. Lighting a candle and thinking about the smell and it's going into you, being present to that smell. 30 seconds. Deciding what kind of temperature water you like on your skin. What feels the best? Do you like a cold stimulus? Do you like really warm? Do you like sitting in a sauna? What do these things feel like on your skin? Noticing that. That's enough. Just notice it. Little by little by little. Paying attention to color. That's another way. So looking at any visual sensory stimuli. Now, that activity of paying attention to sensory stimuli, we can extend it to being very conscious about what taste you're experiencing when you're eating different kinds of food, or even what the texture of the food is. That activity stimulates your vagus nerve. Now, your vagus nerve slows your heart rate and your stress system down. So doing that can help any of these overstimulated activities that come from having a trauma history. I would say the vagus nerve can especially be stimulated prior to sleep, to help sleep. If there's a particular time where you find yourself experiencing anxiety or particular anxiety, using these kind of sensory stimuli will stimulate the vagus nerve. Cold water is one of the magic tick boxes for this. Even washing your face with cold water, or alternatively taking a piece of ice and running along your neck right here, that will immediately slow down your heart rate, and it really is really helpful for panic attacks. In terms of addressing fight, flight, freeze, depending on what you find is your default, and some of you may experience all of them, but if you think intentionally, and I think intentionally about this, about fight, flight, or freeze, what's happening during each? Fight is like this outward expression of feeling, it's tension. How do we get rid of that? For me, you know, when I'm going to competitions for dance is what I do, I get very, very nervous, and I am not somebody that responds to breath work when I'm nervous. It just doesn't work for me. My thinking does not calm down. I am the best when I can put energy out there, so I will literally jump or do push-ups. And that kind of physical contraction of my muscles will help my body regulate itself. I would estimate that could help people who are in a fight mechanism to think about doing physical activity or something active. It could be writing, it could be punching a pillow, it could be doing a set of push-ups or pull-ups, it could be, you know, doing a sprint running, something that's going to tax you just a tad, intentionally thinking about the release of whatever emotion is affiliated with that physical intention. In terms of freezing and fleeing, you get a little bit of the opposite. Let's start with fleeing. You want to run away, so we're thinking of staying, right? So this is the opposite. Running away is going to take a lot of energy. So if that's the impetus, then what we want to kind of resource or move into is the idea of calming the nervous system. Maybe this is where there's a walking meditation, right? So you go outside, walk, pay attention to what you see, what you smell, what you hear. You can even get walking meditations online. Again, for me, I like this because I like to have a little bit of a physical activity component of anything I'm doing with my body. Meditation is great, and for some people that works really, really well. And so that's another option. Then when you're thinking about countering the freeze mechanism, again, think about that puddle and just touching into that puddle. What does it feel like to, when you're experiencing that, open your hand? Just open your hand. What does that feel like? What does it feel like to lengthen your arm? What does it feel like to open your chest? And sometimes opening your chest is too much. Maybe it feels good to stand and know that you can walk. Just little physical activities that you can move into that tells your body, okay, I can stand. I can bring my arms up over my head. Whatever that little thing is that can help kind of loosen up the inclination to go into freeze. In terms of thinking about this therapeutically, somatic experiencing is a good method. I also think any kind of relationship with any kind of therapist is always a plus. Dance therapy, taking a dance class, doing movement that's intentional. Yoga is great. Any kind of weightlifting, just moving and thinking about what you're doing when you're moving or how it's helping you kind of shift your mind and your relationship to your body and inhabiting of your body. Your body's always communicating to you. It's always telling you what it needs. With traumatic histories, sometimes the need is still responding to the trauma. As you move through the process of recovery, I really encourage you to think about what your body needs today. What does my most adult self body need? What does my body in recovery need? Is there something different my body needs than it did during the trauma? These are questions to reflect on, ask, and experiment with. And I really encourage also the experimentation as a puddle. One little thing at a time, nothing's urgent. All little things will make a difference over time. And I really think that growth can happen that way. Thanks.